As a group, they need no introduction. They're the architects behind 9/11, 7/7, the Madrid train bombings, and countless other atrocities. A group that announced its arrival to the world in 2001 with one of the biggest bangs the Western world had ever seen. They were led by one of the most fanatical individuals the world has ever seen. For this group, their religion, Islam, and the way in which they practice, it isn't just worth dying for, it's worth killing for. Tens of thousands of people have perished as a direct result of their actions, and the US's ensuing war on terror has killed many more in trying to stop them. But what is this group? Who are the people who lead them and fight for their cause? Where did they come from? How did a small group of revolutionary jihadists in the 70s go on to pull off one of the largest terror attacks in human history? How do they manage to pull off such sophisticated attacks? Who's funding the terror? And most importantly, why are they doing it? They are one of the most infamous terrorist groups in the world, Al-Qaeda. Now, terrorist organizations, by their very nature, are shadowy. They exist in a gloomy underworld where information about them is murky. They stick to the shadows until it's time to strike. As such, people can hear the names of these groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, and it doesn't really mean anything other than dangerous Islamist group who kill innocent people. So, we're going to give you a rundown of the who, what, when, where, how, and most importantly, the why of Al-Qaeda to help set them apart. This way, you come away from this video with a thorough understanding of what these groups stand for, how they operate, and why they do what they do. But first, it's important to demonstrate just what these groups are capable of. So prepare yourself, because this one gets rather morbid rather quickly, and it's not going to lighten up. On September the 11th, 2001, 19 hijackers boarded 4 US passenger jets, overpowered the pilots armed with box cutters, and proceeded to crash them into symbolic monuments of American hegemony. The targets were the North and South Towers of the World Trade Centers in New York, the headquarters of the US Department of Defense in Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, and the White House itself. 3 of the 4 planes found their targets, with the 4th crashing in Pennsylvania on its way to the White House after the passengers bravely fought back against the hijackers. In the planes themselves, there were no survivors. In total, around 3,000 people were killed in what was the deadliest attack on US soil since Pearl Harbor. Al-Qaeda were not a new organization. People knew they were dangerous, but this was another level. It wasn't just in the US where Al-Qaeda and its leader at the time, Osama bin Laden, made their names. On August the 7th, 1998, several explosions rocked the American embassies in Kenya's capital of Nairobi and the largest city in East Africa, Tanzania's Dar es Salaam. Al-Qaeda would go on to claim the attack that killed 224 people and injured over 4,500 in 2002 when 2 bombs exploded in the tourism district of Kuta on the island of Bali, Indonesia, resulting in 202 fatalities. In 2007, a series of car bombs exploded in the capital city of Baghdad, just the latest in a series of bombings that would claim hundreds more lives. In 2004, at peak rush hour in Madrid, 10 explosions occurred on 4 train carriages, killing 193 people and injuring over 2,000. Al-Qaeda were also responsible for the 7/7 London bombings, in which suicide bombers detonated vests they were wearing on London's public transport. 52 people were killed and almost 800 more were injured. In 2015, Al-Qaeda also took credit for the Charlie Hebdo massacre, in which the French magazine's headquarters in Paris were attacked by multiple gunmen for a cartoon they published of the Prophet Muhammad. France's capital was gripped with fear for 3 days. Hostages were taken and 14 people were killed before the siege of a Parisian supermarket finally ended the madness. These attacks were Al-Qaeda announcing themselves to the world. It showed that they were fanatical, dedicated, resourceful, and not afraid to die for their cause. Their prevalence has given rise to a wider debate in Western society about radical Islam, and their atrocities have shaped the politics of the Western world for the past 2 decades. Simply put, these guys are no joke. But who are these terrorists? Where did they come from? And when did they start deciding to blow innocent people up in the name of global jihad? Just before we continue, quick plug for our fantastic newsletter. Look, imagine never missing the critical details behind today's global events, those decisive moments and hidden narratives that shape our world. And that's exactly what you'll get with the WarFronts newsletter. Every week, you'll receive expertly curated insights into global conflicts, powerful military strategies, and analysis delivered directly to your inbox. No fluff, no noise, just crystal clear clarity wrapped in compelling stories and fascinating historical connections that you just won't find anywhere else. It's completely free, it's genuinely valuable, and signing up just takes a few seconds. There's a link below. Understanding the world just got a whole lot easier thanks to our newsletter. And now back to it. When it comes to the who of Al-Qaeda, there's a couple of questions to answer. Firstly, who are the leaders of this organization that have made the plans and given the order that's caused so much suffering? And secondly, who makes up the rank and file, the foot soldiers who often do the dirty work for those above them? Well, it's more complicated than you might think. And to answer these questions, we need to delve a bit into the organizational structure of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda as an organization is highly horizontal. They have a central council led by an emir or commander who makes executive decisions for the whole organization. There are even committees that cover important sectors of their organization, from media, military, political, and religious committees to more practical organizational ones for logistics and administration. However, Al-Qaeda's councils and committees aren't the only ones calling the shots. Al-Qaeda have several operations at a regional level, such as Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and Al-Shabaab, who operate across Eastern Africa. They have affiliations with around 24 radical Islamist groups. These affiliate and regional organizations fly the Al-Qaeda flag, but ultimately also have a fair amount of autonomy when it comes to decision-making, and sometimes they even have their own committees. The regional actors themselves often rely on individual cells of radical jihadists to carry out attacks in Al-Qaeda's name. Decentralizing the decision-making structure keeps the organization flexible on a practical level. Even if the leader is taken out, someone new can step in and continue operations as normal. You can cut the head off the snake, but the tail still moves. The kind of horizontal structure that Al-Qaeda uses does have its risks, though. To say that such a horizontal, semi-autonomous structure is difficult to exert total control over is like saying Spider-Man is a pretty cool superhero. It's true, but it doesn't really get the sense of scale across. Al-Qaeda's decision-making structure is like holding a fire hose from the center. You'll get the water going mostly in the right direction, and when the stars align, you'll be able to wrangle it into dousing your enemy, but a lot of other things and people are going to get wet in the process, and there's not much that can be done about that. Operatives working under the Al-Qaeda banner are free in a lot of cases to wage jihad as they see fit, as long as their actions align with Al-Qaeda's principles, but this qualifier can lead to division. Brookings reports that during the Iraq War, Al-Qaeda's core leaders were considering splitting Al-Qaeda's affiliate organization in Iraq over their indiscriminate attacks on Sunni Muslims, which makes up almost all of Al-Qaeda's support base. Not all Sunni Muslims support Al-Qaeda, and to suggest as such would be monumentally stupid. In Iraq, Al-Qaeda took exception to this idea, though, treating anyone who didn't support their cause as an apostate and therefore worthy of death, Sunni or otherwise. As much as I'm sure Al-Qaeda aren't all that concerned about their PR, attacking Sunni Muslims was a good way to alienate the group from the only subsection of Islam where they had considerable support. Al-Qaeda in Iraq eventually did splinter off from Al-Qaeda proper and went to Syria, where a caliphate was formed in line with Al-Qaeda's founding principles. That group would go on to form the Islamic State, otherwise known as ISIS. This is the issue with a decentralized structure based around radical jihad. There will always be someone more radical. It's a race to the bottom of depravity and violence. This in and of itself limits the scope to which Al-Qaeda can grow before it splinters into other Islamist organizations. But who is the head of the snake? Who has been the big bad calling the shots at the top of the most premier terrorist organization this side of the millennium? Well, to understand that, we need to go back a short way and delve into a bit of history and to the graveyard of empires, Afghanistan. The Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, and in doing so, spurred up a revolutionary Islamic movement known as the Mujahideen. Amongst the Mujahideen were two Islamic fundamentalists you might have heard of, Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri. These two men were amongst the Mujahideen fighting to liberate Afghanistan from Soviet control. As Islamic jihadist movements were starting to grow in Muslim countries in the 70s and 80s, it inspired jihadist academics to rethink Islam's place in the world. In particular, the writings of an Egyptian Islamist scholar, member of the Muslim Brotherhood and revolutionary ideologue named Sayyid Qutb, paved the way for Al-Qaeda's formation. Qutb postulated that the Islamic world, known as the Ummah, was no longer Islamic thanks to a lack of Sharia law, and that global jihad was needed to re-establish true Islamic states, which meant toppling ideologically opposed regimes, especially Muslim ones that have strayed from true Islam. Qutb was executed by the Egyptian state in 1966, but his words rang true for many radical Muslims who followed his work. One such radical Muslim would be Egyptian Ayman al-Zawahiri, who, alongside Saudi Arabia and Osama bin Laden, would go on to found Al-Qaeda, with Qutb's writings forming the basis of the group's ideology. Even the name Al-Qaeda is a translation meaning the foundation or the base, indicating it is a vehicle through which Qutb's writings could become reality. Bin Laden himself gave an interview to CNN in 1997, which goes some way to explaining the name. Quoting the man himself here, "The name Al-Qaeda was established a long time ago by mere chance. The late Abu Abida al-Banashiri established the training camps for our Mujahideen against Russia's terrorism. We used to call the training camp Al-Qaeda. The name stayed." The quote ends. Osama bin Laden would be the de facto leader of Al-Qaeda from its formal formation in 1988 to his death at the hands of SEAL Team 6 in 2011 during Operation Neptune Spear, after he was found in a compound in the city of Abbottabad in Pakistan. Al-Zawahiri, bin Laden's second-in-command, who is believed to have been the operational brain behind 9/11, continued as the leader of Al-Qaeda until he also met his maker at the hands of the US military. He was killed during a drone strike in Kabul back in 2022. Since then, Foreign Policy reports that no formal leader has been announced for the organization, although Saif al-Adel has emerged as the de facto leader. If reports by Foreign Policy are to be believed, he has been hiding out in Iran since 2003, though other reports place him in Afghanistan. As a leader of a Sunni terrorist organization, being stuck between Shia Iran and the US military is a highly uncomfortable position to be in. Hiding in Iran may be one way to deter the US from killing him, but Israel has no such foibles, having already struck mainland Iran in 2024 to kill Hamas's political leader Ismail Haniyeh. So al-Adel must tread very carefully wherever he might be. Well, that's the leaders. But what about the regular foot soldiers? Who makes up their ranks? In terms of the rank and file of Al-Qaeda, they are, for the most part, radical young Sunni men. Given Al-Qaeda's affiliates operate in a wide range of countries and regions, the group as a whole is reasonably ethnically diverse. Although most Sunnis who join Al-Qaeda are more likely to fight in their own countries, or at the very least in their local regions. More or less anywhere where there is a larger population of young Sunni men, Al-Qaeda will follow to try and bolster their recruitment numbers. However, the hotbeds of Al-Qaeda, according to the Council on Foreign Relations, surround its core in Afghanistan, as well as its regional affiliates in Pakistan, Syria, the Horn of Africa, North Africa, the Maghreb, the Indian subcontinent, and much of the Arabian Peninsula. It can be difficult to ascertain the exact number of members of Al-Qaeda as the circumstances around affiliate groups are ever changing. The Council on Foreign Relations placed the number of total Al-Qaeda members and affiliate members in the tens of thousands range as of 2019. With the Taliban reconquering Afghanistan following the US's withdrawal in 2021, Al-Qaeda's core has a base of operations there set up under the protection of the Taliban government. Alright, so that's the who. But one of the biggest questions there is around terror organizations like Al-Qaeda is why. What compels a group of people to shoot and blow up innocent civilians? Well, it's because according to Al-Qaeda's own doctrine, they're not innocent. Al-Qaeda has a several-point plan to bring about a global jihad, but especially in the Muslim world. We won't go over the full plan in detail here as it would take all day, but it involved drawing the US and the West into a protracted conflict through their jihad, bringing the US into wars with the Muslim world, which would then lead to backlash. Then the plan was to destabilize the US and after cause global financial markets to crash, at which point regimes would be weak enough for jihadists to take over and build a true fundamentalist Islamic state. This revolutionary jihad is also referred to as Salafism. This would ultimately culminate in a final confrontation between the Islamic world and the West, with Islam emerging victorious. It's safe to say that outside of a few parts being bang on the money, Al-Qaeda has not succeeded in these goals. These objectives were realized as far back as 1988 through Palestinian Islamist scholar and jihadist teacher Abdullah Razam, who in the 1988 issue of Al-Jihad magazine, yeah, that really exists, described a religiously committed vanguard of Muslims to wage global jihad, liberate oppressed Muslims from foreign invaders, and establish Sharia law in Oman by overthrowing secular ruling governments. Bin Laden's own words also describe his group's reasons for declaring jihad on the United States, quoting his translated words here: "The US government has committed acts that are extremely unjust, hideous, and criminal through its support of the Israeli occupation of Palestine, and we believe the US is directly responsible for those killed in Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq. Due to its subordination to the Jews, the arrogance of the United States regime has reached the point that they occupied Arabia, the holiest place of the Muslims, who are more than 1 billion people in the world today. For this and other acts of aggression and injustice, we have declared jihad against the US." The quote ends. The broader idea of liberating the Muslim world from a foreign invader is straight out of Qutbi's writings and the Al-Qaeda ideological playbook. Simply put, if you're not with them, you are against them. To that end, anybody helping the apparent subjugation of the Muslim world, which may well include the citizens of Western nations, is therefore a valid target for Al-Qaeda's attacks. As we mentioned though, this can extend to any nation that isn't currently under Sharia law, which is most of them. The Countering Terrorism Center at West Point have translated Al-Qaeda's structure and bylaws document, and it has the following to say regarding the governments of the world not conforming to their Salafist regime. Quote, "Our position with respect to the tyrants of the world, secular and national parties and the like, is not to associate with them, to discredit them, and to be their constant enemy till they believe in God alone. We shall not agree with them on half solutions, and there is no way to negotiate with them or to appease them." End quote. It's clear that this version of Islam has no place for infidels. These are pretty lofty ideals on paper, and Al-Qaeda has gone some of the way to ultimately making them a reality. So how do they do it? What strategies are Al-Qaeda using for recruitment, funding, and the enormous amount of violence they perpetrate? So we know who Al-Qaeda are, we know when they were most prominent, and we know roughly where they operate and why. But now we have to dive into how this organization operates. What are the key factors that facilitate the running of Al-Qaeda today? This can be split up into three broad sections: how Al-Qaeda recruits, how it makes its money, and how it conducts terror attacks. First of all, the big stuff. How does Al-Qaeda conduct terror attacks on countries all over the world to relative success, given their concentration in just a few core locations? Well, Al-Qaeda's cell-based and regional structures helps with that. Orders don't necessarily have to come from the top down for attacks to take place. The semi-autonomy of terror cells means that any singular cell can be a conduit through which an attack is planned and carried out. This is also how Al-Qaeda has been able to attack Western targets, as cells hiding dormant in Western nations are able to carry out actions aligned with Al-Qaeda's concept of global jihad. Some Al-Qaeda members are trained in camps with guns and explosives, as bin Laden's quote on the origin of the group's name alludes to. Al-Qaeda commonly also infiltrates conflict zones in order to expand their power and influence, with Yemen being a great example of this. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula have around 4,000 fighters in Yemen, according to the Council on Foreign Relations. Al-Qaeda's intelligence is an often underreported aspect of their attacks. They often do dry runs of attacks, and they often do reconnaissance beforehand to assess vulnerabilities in security and opportunities to strike. This determines the medium of attack, which can be guns or explosives depending on the situation. However, explosives cause the most collateral damage and maximize casualties, which is a key element of Al-Qaeda's doctrine, making them preferable. Attacks can be ambushes, suicide bombings, vehicle bombings, or hijackings, depending on what is available to a specific cell at the time. This approach makes Al-Qaeda highly adaptable to the on-the-ground situation in a specific area. Targets for attacks are often chosen for their symbolism or significance. After all, 9/11 aimed at the center of US financial power, the Department of Defense, and the White House. 7/7 and Madrid's attacks on the public transportation systems were targeted not just for the practical sense of killing as many people in a tight space as possible, but as a symbol of Western modernity and interconnectedness, multicultural societies in each nation's respective capital. This differs, according to Brookings, from an organization like ISIS, who aim to conduct jihad however, wherever, and whenever they can. But before someone carries out a terror attack on an urban population center, they first have to be recruited, and Al-Qaeda use various means in order to facilitate that recruitment. Not every person or place is the same, and Al-Qaeda often use a throw everything at the wall and see what sticks approach to recruitment. Members can be recruited through family or friends, through institutions like schools and universities, or increasingly in the modern age, through social media. Their message could be delivered through sponsored media, cellmate to cellmate in prisons, or from imam to worshippers in mosques. The sheer scale and breadth of Al-Qaeda's recruitment strategies allow for the highest possible chance that some disenfranchised young Muslim man will be convinced to become a martyr. Al-Qaeda even disseminate information about how to build explosive devices and to wage jihad over the internet in what have become known as lone wolf attacks, where the radicalized individual does not even have to meet their groomer in person to join. We want to make this as clear as possible. Do not go looking for this stuff on the internet unless you want the authorities to knock on your door. Counterterrorism efforts extend the monitoring of the online space. You've been warned. Al-Qaeda are known, according to the Rand Corporation, to prey on young Sunni men with dysfunctional traditional family lives. When a family's gravity is weaker, it can often be enough to pull them away and further radicalize them. Al-Qaeda is not lost on the idea that their image is important to maintain help with recruitment, which is why CNN was allowed to interview arguably the most dangerous man in the world in 1997. In fact, according to Brookings, Al-Qaeda are even considered tolerant towards some non-Muslim Westerners like journalists and aid workers. Brookings further documents occurrences where Al-Qaeda has let these kinds of actors go when captured. For lack of a better phrase, Al-Qaeda's fight is not with them. Such individuals do not fare as well when they're in the custody of ISIS, who treat all non-Muslim Westerners as apostates that need to be executed. For such a widespread organization with tens of thousands of members, you'd be right to wonder where Al-Qaeda gains the financial resources required to stage conflict all over the world. For a long time, it was commonly believed that Osama bin Laden's personal fortune was bankrolling the group, as his family are very wealthy. His father, Mohammed bin Awad bin Laden, was a highly successful businessman who built a construction empire in Saudi Arabia. It was thought that bin Laden Jr. had access to his father's immense fortune after he died. However, many of bin Laden's assets had been frozen by the time he made his way to Afghanistan and set up Al-Qaeda. Not to mention, if bin Laden was bankrolling the whole operation, you would have expected the money to dry up at least somewhat after his death. Instead, Al-Qaeda use a foray of techniques and strategies across their regions of influence to raise funds. The first thing we have to mention is that the financial bar for terrorism isn't that high in the grand scheme of things. The International Center for Counterterrorism estimates that the entire cost of 9/11 was around $500,000. Madrid was $50,000. 7/7 in London, just $15,000. Prior to 9/11, the CIA estimated the cost to run Al-Qaeda yearly was about $30 million. So enough wealthy backers would be enough to bankroll Al-Qaeda's operations for a considerable period of time. Al-Qaeda's financial facilitators raise money from witting and unwitting donors, mosques and sympathetic imams, and non-government organizations such as charities with less than stellar records, a lot of which are in Saudi Arabia. The ICCT reports that the money seems to be distributed as quickly as it's raised, and the ICCT have found no evidence that there is a central bank or war chest from which Al-Qaeda draws funds. As much as we would like to imagine Al-Qaeda's members putting a few quid in the piggy bank, it simply isn't realistic or smart to have all your terrorist money in one place. It is reported that some donors knew where their money was going while others didn't, with the ICCT asserting the bulk of their money is raised during the month of Ramadan. In more modern times, and region to region, there are less favorable but unconfirmed money-raising tactics. Scams, business fronts, financial crime, drugs, credit card fraud, and even kidnap and ransom techniques are all used to varying degrees globally. It's also important for Al-Qaeda to be able to move money from one place to another, which raises a whole series of questions. The ICCT ascertained that 2/3 of the money that was spent on 9/11 was moved through US banks. However, after 9/11 and the ensuing financial crackdown, this became much more difficult, leading to inventive techniques and strategies by Al-Qaeda in order to move money quickly and covertly. The Wilson Center reports that offshore and indeed traditional banks are still used by Al-Qaeda, but these come with high risks of asset seizure. They've also been known to trade in commodities like gold, diamonds, oil, and cash, all of which can be made very difficult to trace. Another key system is Hawala, an informal money lending system that operates outside of and parallel to traditional financial markets. So how does this work? Well, let's say I wanted to send some money to my tailor for always providing me with smart blazers, which I'm not wearing today. I would approach a Hawalada, who is the middleman, give him some money and my tailor's details. The Hawalada reaches out to another Hawalada in the country where my tailor lives and gives him the details. Both Hawaladas agree to make the transaction, and then the second Hawalada takes the amount from his own money and gives it to my tailor. The Hawaladas then meet up at a future date to settle the debt. This would allow me to send money to my tailor across the world without creating a paper trail linking us together, worth every penny for those fine untraceable jackets. It's an ancient system that has been used for centuries and still sees extensive use today. In war-torn areas, this is a semi-reliable way to get money to a person quickly, but it also allows organizations like Al-Qaeda to skirt around traditional financial systems in case anybody is monitoring them. That's the basis of Al-Qaeda's methodologies. These are the strategies, alongside their doctrine and dogma, that allow them to support so much violence across the globe. Or do they? Because I don't know about you, but I haven't seen Al-Qaeda in the headlines much lately. Did they go underground? Did they die out completely, collapsing into infighting following the death of their leaders? Well, it might surprise you to know that outside of a change in strategy, Al-Qaeda are still very much alive and kicking. So, what of Al-Qaeda today? Since 9/11 and the ensuing height of their attacks in the 2000s, you may be inclined to think that the organization has somewhat fallen away into obscurity, and it's clear to see that whilst Al-Qaeda is undoubtedly still a serious, dangerous organization, it's rapidly been disappearing from Western media. The last significant jihadist attack, according to Foreign Policy, was in 2019 when a Saudi Air Force trainee working with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula killed 3 sailors at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. The group has become even more decentralized over time, and there is more of a focus of these regional actors in pushing for regional political upheaval through violence. The goal of Al-Qaeda is ultimately to create a true Islamic State after all, and whilst flashy attacks in Europe and the US announced Al-Qaeda to the world, they didn't further the group's own goals in Myanmar. The fight for them is ultimately on home soil, and this change of tact may reflect somewhat of a realignment for Al-Qaeda away from the international attacks that made them global pariahs. Similarly, the fracturing of Al-Qaeda in 2013 when an offshoot became ISIS also pulled many away from Al-Qaeda's grasp. More extreme and radical organization took the initiative as the premier terror organization from Al-Qaeda in going to try and build their own caliphate in Syria and Iraq from scratch in the 2010s. An initiative that, despite ISIS's defeat, Al-Qaeda hasn't really been able to get back. It makes sense why some may have chosen to defect. ISIS were trying to realize Al-Qaeda's ultimate goal in real time, and for a while it looked like they might succeed. Strong affiliates and Al-Qaeda's core itself have also suffered devastating leadership losses since the War on Terror began, which makes it harder for Al-Qaeda to coordinate external attacks. The 2 founders are dead without ever realizing their goals, which may put many people off from joining in the first place. If that's what happened to the emir, what hopes does a foot soldier have? The US's drone and airstrike programs, as well as the training of foreign militaries in counter-terrorism tactics, has also helped to reduce Al-Qaeda's leadership numbers. Their financial backers have been targeted as well, and whilst it would be impossible to stem the flow of money to Al-Qaeda completely, owing to their diverse side hustles, it slows their growth and makes a venture in them look even riskier. To put it in business terms, Al-Qaeda has ultimately been undergoing a period of restructuring to ensure it can focus its efforts where it matters. And for now, that is in the West. Al-Qaeda was once a name feared the world over, and there's a power in a legacy like that. However, it's also important to look to the future, not the past. Al-Qaeda's numbers are steady. They have strongholds in most of the Islamic world, and their core is situated in Afghanistan under a friendly regime. They have been quietly rebuilding and adapting in the shadows and waiting for their time to strike. Let's hope, for all our sakes, that it isn't coming anytime soon. And thank you for watching.